Hello there, you 6.3 million awakening wonders. Thanks for joining me on this voyage towards truth and freedom. If we stay open, if we stay awake, I believe it's possible to change the world. The conversation I want to present to you today is a great exemplifier of that. I spoke to Dr. Cornel West, philosopher, political activist, and free thinker. In particular, I spoke to him about January the 6th, about how it's such an obvious example of division, of propaganda, of people being divided, of people using the same story to create different perspectives. I spoke to him about, can we come together? This conversation showed me that there is still hope left in liberalism. There is some soul left in the left, that there is a possibility for new unity, new alliances, new collaborations, that we share more in common with one another than we have that divides us, that true diversity is beautiful, that we have nothing to fear, that within us all are the resources that we're going to require to change the world. Stay to the end of the conversation. Let me know in the chat and the comments what you think about it, because I need to know who you want to see on this show and what questions you want to see asked, and more importantly, what questions you want to see answered. Been considering for a while that materialism, rationalism, and post-enlightenment values have led inexorably, even if inadvertently, to a state of nihilism such as you describe. That it's very difficult with populations of scale to instantiate a centralized set of values, ethics, and meaning. And it appears that this divisiveness that I feel that somehow the culture is benefiting from has become worse and worse in recent years. A few just like placeholder arguments to consider, Cornel, as we hopefully advance our conversation, sir, is my friend Adam Curtis, the documentary maker, who said no one ever made a left-wing case for Brexit. No one has, and I would add to that, no one has ever considered what the emotional timbre of Trump was, what it is that he reaches in people, what it is beyond the rhetoric and divisiveness, what it is within that emotional quality that is reaching people. Given that this is a contemporary news show that we are streaming right now, it's worth bringing up an issue that's becoming somewhat defining of our time, the January 6th insurrection. It seems impossible to say that both those events and the Black Lives Matter uprisings in the summer of the murder of George Floyd are in a sense a demonstration of the problems that centralized authority will always bring about. That until we have a time where people that corral around these separate issues, these separate publics, if these separate publics cannot recognize that ultimately they have to confront the same authority, we will not experience the kind of unity that both of us apparently crave. How do you think we have to frame the conversation, both for people on the neoliberal establishment left, but also for people that identify with patriotism and what are called these days right-wing politics, so that we can overcome and not only accept but love and embrace cultural difference in order to meaningfully confront these forms of centralized media, political, financial, and military authority that are thriving in this climate of division, sir?
Yeah, I think we always want to begin with a fundamental commitment to wrestling with what it means to be human, because when you get to our deep humanity, that functions at a level that is much more profound than what color, than what gender, what sexual orientation. While we're all wrestling with organized greed at the top especially, but across the board, we're all wrestling with various forms of hatred and self-doubt inside of us. We have to be honest and candid with ourselves, just as we're honest and candid with the powers that be. That's precisely what the legacy of the Martin Luther King Jr.'s and the Fannie Lou Hamers and the Ella Bakers and the John Coltrane's and the Aretha Franklin. And I was listening to a little Loose Ends, and I was listening to a little Soul to Soul for my British connection here. What? When you listen to that music, my brother, it touches your soul. The soul is always deeper than what color you are. It's deeper than your gender. That's why the arts become important. That's why you love Richard Pryor. That's why if Pryor was alive, he'd love you. He say, oh, this brother's the real thing. He's like George Carlin. He's telling the truth coming from his soul, but unique voice. Now, of course, the voice of black, the national anthem of black people is what? Lift every voice, not lift every echo. We're not going to be an extension of an echo chamber. Neo-fascist, right-wing, neoliberal Democratic Party, both of them not just inadequate, both of them are major obstacles at this point for the empowerment of everyday people. So that again, the spiritual dimension, the moral sensitivity becomes important. And then, for example, when you go to Trump's people and you say, lo and behold, they're not homogeneous, they're heterogeneous. Some of them are racist, some of them are less racist. Most of them catching hell. Most of them are wounded economically. Most of them feeling as if they have been losers in the corporate globalization in the last 50 years. They are right about that. Even Brother Tucker, with all of his challenges and so forth, he's right about that. But the question becomes, we got to bring serious critique to bear on any kind of white supremacist, male supremacist, homophobic or transphobic sensibilities that they might have, but also recognize they are human beings just like us. And the fundamental question is the question that you've wrestled with and I've wrestled with. What does it mean to be a wounded healer rather than a wounded hurter? If you're wounded and then you're going to somehow demonize the vulnerable rather than confront the most powerful, you're going to end up with a right-wing populism rather than a progressive populism, or most importantly, in the language of Sheldon Wolin, my dear brother Bernard Harcourt, his new book on the cooperative movement, on Nancy Fraser's Cannibal Capitalism. What are they talking about? Solidarity. But you can't have solidarity unless you have analysis and vision enacted by persons like yourself and others that say, you know what, I'm going to put myself out here and try to exemplify the very thing I'm calling for.
Well, yes. Thank you. Like Eric Fromm's edict that the priest espouses the word, but the prophet must become the message. You must live it.
That's it, brother. That's it. That's exactly it.
One of the things I enjoy about learning from you, Doctor, is that your analysis and discourse begins at a point of good faith, not from a point of misanthropy. This idea of acknowledging personal vulnerability as a starting point for our conversation, I feel, facilitates a more fruitful and potentially beneficial conversation around the necessary cultural issues that you've identified around race and misogyny and exploitation. I spoke once to the British footballer who is black, John Barnes, who's a brilliant footballer for Liverpool and a few other teams, Watford, like in the 90s, and experienced, therefore, the kind of bold as brass, barefaced racism of Britain in the 80s, where like people were throwing bananas and all that kind of stuff. Barnes, though, was from a colonial background. I believe he maybe was born or grew up in somewhere like Trinidad, maybe, or maybe Jamaica. I'm not quite sure. He played for England. He was English. But his father was in the military. So from a class perspective, he was not growing up in the estates like many black footballers of that era. And he said he'd had a different perspective on race as a result of that. And his way of explaining the subject of race that he offered, he said that when talking to impoverished white people in the UK, he said that in addition to the suffering that you experience as a result of inequality and poverty, black people, as we still say in this country, of your class face additional suffering. I feel somehow that this openness is a way of progressing and advancing the conversation rather than being entrenched in ossified oppositionism. That as you say, there has to be a spirit of healing, and I don't sense that in the misanthropy of the mainstream. I think the starting point for both sides is, whether it's a Christian idea of the original sin, which I heard a few commentators use, actually, Cornel, in your country, or a kind of more atheistic, materialistic perspective of damnation derived, I suppose, from the nihilism that individualism ultimately leads you to. If our consciousness is just a side effect of biochemical processes, then nothing means anything anyway. Take what you can get. And this idea of infusing vulnerability and love, and indeed spirit, into the conversation is necessary, but sometimes it can feel by its nature ineffable, and in a time where there are less and less traditions to lean into. New ageism can sound diffuse and ersatz. How do you give it the cojones, the necessary stones that spirituality has to bring to the conversation, the kind of God that we need right now? How do you stop it sounding new age, limp, and lacking in the potency we require?
What a beautiful question, though, brother. Good God, you have a way of asking these profound queries, and I appreciate it, too. That one, I do begin on a very, blue note, because I'm come from a blues people, you know what I mean? And the blues is catastrophe lyrically expressed. So you begin with catastrophe, but don't allow it to have the last word. So I'll begin on a blue note. Most of human history has been a history of hatred and greed and envy and resentment and domination and subjugation. That's just what it is. Thank God that there's always been a cloud of witnesses every generation, going all the way back to Africa. At the very beginning, every generation has been a group of people that have said that, in fact, in the name of integrity, honesty, decency, generosity, courage, vision, we are not going to allow domination, subjugation, hatred, greed, and resentment to have the last word. Those are the ones who have been the unacknowledged legislators of the world, to use the language of Shelley. Those poets who use, and by poet, I just mean any human being who uses imagination and empathy to authorize a better future than the nightmarish present. And presently, in our own particular moment, where the nihilism is so real, was so much of secularism. And secularism at its best has been very important. It brought critique to bear on forms of authority, king's authority, white supremacist authority, male supremacist authority, the authority of bosses, the authority of bullies. Secularism played a very important role, but it got devoured by commodification. It got devoured by materialism. That's why Martin King said materialism, poverty, racism, and militarism are the four forces sucking the life energies out of democracy. That's Martin King, those four. So what do? Well, we say, okay, how do we become and remain clouds of witnesses in our own day based on those who came before? We can go back to the Greeks with Antisthenes against slavery, Diderot in France against imperialism. It could be Miles Horton, white brother, vanilla brother, with Martin King and Rosa Parks struggling against white supremacy and American apartheid. It could be, we go to Britain, look at Ruskin, look at William Morris, look at the New Left Review, look at Russell Brand. There's a whole Stuart Hall, Paul Gilroy. There's always been a cloud of witnesses saying, let us try to ensure that there's possibilities of solidarities against these structures of domination and these forms of bondage psychically and spiritually. And in our day, it's the nihilism. The great Rabbi Heschel used to say, the largest movement in the modern world is nihilism. That's Rabbi Heschel. And what he meant by that is meaninglessness, hopelessness, lovelessness, touchlessness, all of the things that numb us, all of the things that reinforce callousness, all of the things that reinforce indifference, and indifference to evil's more insidious than evil itself. It becomes ways of life. So that what has happened, especially in the American empire, is the professional managerial class, which cuts across conservatives, liberals, right across the board. They are not only the winners, they have become so arrogant. They have become so condescending. They've become so haughty. In America, only 34% of Americans even go to college. So the vast majority never set foot in college, but corporate media is all professional managerial class. All the discourse is professional managerial class. So they live in a silo. It's a parochial context. It's a provincial circumstance, and they think that's the world. It's like thinking the university is the universe. Please get off the crack pipe. There's everyday people out there. There's ordinary people out there, and they're suffering. They have been the major losers across race, across gender, across region, and across national lines, because we know this is a global capitalist project that we're bringing critique to bear as it connects to American empire, Chinese empire, Russian empire, and so forth. And we have to be very honest about it. What I love about you, though, brother, is that you've tried to be morally consistent. That you can be in solidarity with the Ukrainian brothers and sisters and still have a critique of the U.S. empire vis-a-vis NATO and what the United States would do if missiles were in Mexico and Canada. You know, they would blow it to smithereens in a minute. And you say, oh, well, Putin's a gangster. Yes, he is a gangster, but American gangsterism is also part of the story. And the question is, how do you be consistent in that regard? Now, as you know, that's what got Brother Martin King in trouble. That's what got Dick Gregory in trouble. That's what got Mom Mabley in trouble. I'm thinking of the artists as well as the spokespersons. And you say, okay, bring the trouble on. That you come from Sister Barbara, your precious mother, strong as she can be. She brought in the world this young brother Russell, strong as he can be, up and down, on the mountaintop, in the valley, but still fortified, still ready, still humble, still learning, still growing, still maturing. I'm exactly the same thing. I come out of Irene, brother. That's my mama. Oh, yes. I'm still a cracked vessel trying to love my crooked neighbor with my crooked heart. Yes, I am. But most importantly, I want to be a force for good. Given all my crackness, I want to be a force for good. That's Russell too.
Well, did you enjoy that conversation? If you want to see more stuff like that, you can join me every day on Rumble. Have a look. We are available at these times, continually broadcasted, continually looking for new alliances. Join us every day. Be part of the solution. Be part of this movement, whoever you are, wherever you are welcome. Redemption is possible. Glory will be upon us. Thanks for watching the show. Stay free.
All right. The beginning bit of the pandemic, it was like really nice. It was about a month where it was like a free holiday, and I thought this is going to be beautiful. That spirit didn't last that long, did it? You won't get addicted to that. You take it in a jungle. I'm not going to not get addicted to something just because there's a toucan nearby. You should not let your children look at screens. Now I've got them, I'm like, oh, stick Netflix on and give it a Rolo, will ya?
That clip was from my new special, Brandemic, only available on Locals. You can buy the special for $20 or you can become a member of our community to get both the special and all my Locals content for one whole year.